Oh. I'm State Representative Lisa Subeck. Thank you for being here today, and thank you to all of the people and organizations who are still fighting to get big money out of politics 9 years after the Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United. The 2010 ruling on Citizens United opened the floodgates to unlimited election spending by corporations and special interests. Essentially, it sold our democracy to the highest bidder. The Citizens United ruling gave a giant megaphone to corporations and to billionaires and to special interest groups that they have used to effectively drown out the voices of regular people in the halls of our state capitals, in our local government, and in our federal capital. Since Citizens United, big money has continued to grow its influence in our elections. In 2018, we saw a record-breaking $61 million spent by outside groups. This is more than the previous 2 midterm elections combined. And this is only the spending we know about. Because so much of the money spent in our elections is what is called dark money, due to our insufficient disclosure laws, we don't really even know how much more money was spent to influence the people's votes in these elections. This is only the part that we've been able to track and trace. The people are tired of having their voices drowned out by big money. As politicians become more and more beholden to wealthy special interests and more dependent upon this flood of campaign cash at election time, the interests of the people, of the constituents who I and others are elected to represent, continue to take a back seat to the big money special interests. I hear out there when I'm out knocking on doors in the community that people are fed up with this. People want big money out of politics. They want government that is for the people, by the people, of the people, not for, of, and by a wealthy few. Tonight, our governor will lay out his vision for the state in his first State of the State speech. Immediately upon taking office, he traveled the state holding listening sessions, talking to and listening to the people, listening to their vision. While I don't know what will be in the governor's speech tonight, I am quite sure that he will talk about issues like strong public schools, like access to affordable quality health care, like taking care of our state and the things that we all hold near and dear. Things that we all as elected officials hear about when we're out knocking on our constituents' doors or when we are out in the communities that we serve. Unfortunately, over the last 8 years, we have seen Republicans in the legislature put their donors and special interest groups ahead of their constituents time and again. And we cannot move forward on the issues that matter most to Wisconsin families as long as the majority party is in the pockets of wealthy donors and special interests. If this does not change, we will not move forward toward realizing the hopes and the dreams of the people of Wisconsin, no matter how strongly our governor's vision or our vision is for our state resembles that of the people of Wisconsin. To be clear, though, this is not actually a Republican or Democratic issue. Across the board, Republicans, Democrats, third parties, and independents alike, citizens support overturning Citizens United and getting big money out of politics. It is only in the halls of our state capitol and in the halls of government that this becomes a partisan issue. When you talk to the people across the board, they're saying, get big money out, put people ahead of politics. To date, 144 referendums and resolutions, similar to the one that we will be proposing today, have passed in cities and towns and villages across Wisconsin. Voters have sent a clear message to elected officials like me. It is time to put people first. Resolutions have passed in very Democratic areas like Madison and Milwaukee, and also in very conservative areas like Neenah, Menasha, Delavan, and Waukesha by overwhelming margins. 9 communities just passed resolutions last November, with support ranging from, on the low end, 69% passage in Jackson County to a whopping 91% in Reedstown. The resolution we are introducing today is an important step forward toward overturning Citizens United. The resolution would place an advisory referendum question on the ballot in November of 2020, asking the voters of Wisconsin if they support a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. We must take urgent action now to restore fairness and to level the playing field in a political system that has become rigged to favor big money special interests over the people of Wisconsin. At the very least, the least we can do is to pass this resolution and let the people of Wisconsin be heard on the issue of getting big money out of politics. I will now turn it over to my co-author of this resolution from the Senate, Senator Dave Hansen. Thank you.
Out of courtesy, you all set? We wouldn't want to miss any media on this important issue. You all set? I'm just being polite.
That's a good thing. You need a side angle too. Oh, you get your own microphone. Oh.
No, that goes up here. You just want to go over there. Well, good morning. It's great that you all came out. Very, very important topic that we've been dealing with for several years. And the issue of corporate spending to influence our elections has been a concern of Congress for over 100 years, since Congress first banned corporations from funding political campaigns in 1907. Boy, they did that right. And it's time that we do it right as well. And for the most part, it was a concern of the courts until 2010, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that money equals speech, a decision that opened the floodgates for corporations and the wealthy to spend almost unlimited amounts of money to influence voters. The result, as you can see by some of the signs here, the voice of the average voters and even the candidates themselves is often drowned out by the amplified megaphones of corporations and billionaires. Allowing corporations and billionaires to influence our election on either side of the aisle opens the door to corruption, as Justice Stevens noted in his dissent in the court. The difference between selling a vote and selling access is a matter of degree, not kind, Justice Stevens wrote, and selling access is not qualitatively different from giving special preference to those who spent money on one's behalf. We've seen the outside influence of the court's decision in the policy that has resulted in tax breaks for corporations and the rich that have led to increasing and rising inequality, the elimination of regulations that protect workers and our families, and an open attack on our environment that has put our groundwater, our clean air, and even our children's and grandchildren's future at risk. We're here today to say what the vast majority of constituents are saying. The Supreme Court got it absolutely wrong, and it's time for a change. Money is not speech. Corporations are not people, and we can no longer afford the corrupting influence of corporate money that has infiltrated our government since the Citizens United decision. This isn't a partisan issue, or it shouldn't be. Teddy Roosevelt, our 26th president, and a Republican, believed that corporations should be banned from making campaign contributions at all, and called for a law prohibiting all corporations from contributing to the campaign expenses of any party. Our founding fathers fought a war so that we, the people, had the freedom to govern this great nation. And during our nation's wars, brave and loyal Americans have honored their sacred duty to serve and protect our democracy and our right to vote, to have our voices heard. These courageous and patriotic Americans didn't sacrifice their lives so that corporations could use their wealth to buy, absolutely to buy our elections and control our government. Our founding fathers didn't declare a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. They didn't found this nation to replace a king with an oligarchy. The Citizens United decision has turned our founding fathers' vision on its head, and they are spinning in their graves at the way the Supreme Court has subverted our Constitution that so many gave their lives in sacrifice for. So we're here today once again to say enough is enough. It's time for the people to take back their elections. It's time to overturn Citizens United and get corporate money and its influence out of our elections. And it's time to find out who is on people's side and what people are not on the people's side. Thank you, and it's my honor to introduce to you good friend Matt Rothschild.
Thanks for coming today, friends. I'm Matt Rothschild. I'm the Executive Director at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, which tracks and exposes money in politics and advocates for a full democracy where everyone has an equal say. First off, I'd like to thank Senator Hansen and Representative Subeck for their tremendous, steadfast, and visionary leadership on this urgent issue. And secondly, I'd like to thank the Money Out Voters In Coalition of Wisconsin that sponsored this event. The coalition consists of Blue Jean Nation, Citizen Action of Wisconsin, Common Cause in Wisconsin, Our Wisconsin Revolution, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, Wisconsin Farmers Union, WisPIRG, Wisconsin United to Amend, and Wisconsin Voices. It's great to have a coalition that actually is not just a paper coalition that really works together, and that's what this coalition does. Simply put, let me cut to the chase. We don't have a shot at a fair and full democracy until we can curb big money, dark money, and corporate money. And the best way to do that is to amend the U.S. Constitution to proclaim once and for all that corporations actually aren't persons, and money actually isn't speech. Citizens United is just a shorthand. It's a shorthand for 130 bad decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court on corporate rights, and we got to tear them all down. There was the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad decision in 1886, where a staffer of the U.S. Supreme Court, not a justice, put on top in a head note of that decision this idea that corporations are persons. And from there on, the Supreme Court has cited that as precedent. That's how crazy this thing is. Then there was Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, where the court said that money is speech. And then here in 2010, we had the Citizens United decision, where the court said corporations and other groups can spend unlimited amounts of money to try to elect a candidate so long as they're not coordinating their activities with that candidate. That decision in Citizens United contained two of the most naive statements ever published in a U.S. Supreme Court decision. Here's the first one. Independent expenditures, including those made by corporations, do not give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption. Secondly, the appearance of influence or access, furthermore, will not cause the electorate to lose faith in our democracy. You got to ask what planet those justices were living on, because the electorate is already losing faith in our democracy because of big money, dark money, and corporate money. Lastly, I'd just like to point out that this year, the anniversary of the Citizens United decision fell yesterday on the same day as Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And Martin Luther King understood that corporations weren't people and didn't deserve the rights of people. Property is not man, he said. And then in one of his most famous speeches, he said, if profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. And this, as in so many other things, Martin Luther King Jr. was way ahead of his time. We simply can't have Dr. King's beloved community until we strip corporations of constitutional rights. Thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, a longtime friend of mine, Bill Franks, who is on the board of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. He's also the chair of the Labor and Industry Committee of the NAACP of Dane County. Bill?
Thank you, Matt. Well done.
We stand with Matt. I entitled my remarks, The Anniversary of Citizens United's Decision and the Celebration of the Life of the late Martin Luther King, Jr. I bring you greetings on behalf of the NAACP of Dane County, Branch 36AB. The mission of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is to ensure political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. The vision of the NAACP is to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race. Every American will have free, open, equal, and protected access to the vote and fair representation at all levels of the political process. One of our key concepts under the Voting Rights and Political Representation Policy Preference is, quote, by protecting democracy, enhancing equity, and increasing democratic participation and civic engagement. Black folks, some people call African Americans, I don't because I'm too old, will be proportionally elected to political office. Citizens United, a 5-4 vote of the United States Supreme Court, stands as a repudiation of our association's position on black political participation and representation. The reason this decision is a civil rights issue is obvious. The less money you have, the less effective you are in influencing anything of value in your life and the things we all need and deserve. Limiting access that average working class folks have to those officials who represent them can only yield an adverse effect on those persons without money it takes to have such an effect. Martin was assassinated when he was summoned to Memphis, Tennessee to help resolve an impasse between City of Memphis officials, particularly Mayor Loeb, and the sanitation workers in early 1968. He put the poor people's movement on hold while diverting to the sanitation workers' strike. His famous I Have Been to the Mountaintop sermon was delivered the night before his murder. What would Martin have said about this? It's clear from his writings and his teachings, he would have been convinced that excessive amounts of money have a corrupting effect on democracy. It is not exactly as if wealthy individuals and corporations have been suffering lately. We have no objection to paying our fair share. Subsidizing those who don't need that advantage is what we find objectionable and, quite frankly, small d, undemocratic. Once you see the onslaught of political advertising every campaign season, it becomes clear to me and to others that too great a portion of the money spent on advertising is a sad waste of time and effort. Saturation bombing voters with a continuous supply of negative and frequently misleading messaging does nothing to further the interests of our democracy. The reasonable limits of spending and disclosure who's contributing to campaigns, aka dark money, is intended to shield these donors from scrutiny. This lack of transparency allows those with questionable motives to influence our political decision makers. No, money is not and should not be the same or equal to speech. Only speech is speech. That speech must come from the people.
Thank you, Bill. Our next speaker is George Penn, one of the lead organizers with Wisconsin United to Amend.
Thank you, Matt. So we heard about morality, we heard about politics, we heard about the needs of this country and the people. I'm a pragmatist, I'm an engineer. I want to talk about the future and hope. Right? Wisconsin United to Amend started February 2010, within a month after Citizens United, along with a group in California that is spreading across the country, and we will continue to spread to build this movement. In Wisconsin, since February 2010, we have passed 144 communities have passed resolutions calling for this constitutional amendment that says two things. Let me be clear, that clarifies in the Constitution, does not change the Constitution, that Only human beings have constitutional rights, not corporations, unions, associations, or any artificial entities. And 2, money is not speech, and therefore limiting campaign contributions and donations is not limiting free speech. This is the premise of the bills that these gentle Assembly and Senate persons have offered to the state again for the 3rd time, for the 3rd session since 2013, and we will offer it in every session. We are, you can see on this map, if you can focus in on the screen here, we are a little light in the north, and we are redoubling our efforts, and you're going to be seeing in future years a filling in of communities, conservative communities, that want this constitutional amendment. They point out issues here, right here at the top. The most northern one we have is the town of Lake Tomahawk. Passed the resolution in that town in 2016, and it was passed by the first one. We've had 4 communities that have voted yes, 91%. This was the first one, and it voted heavily Trump and Johnson. It is a very conservative community. Conservatives and liberal citizens know we need to fix this. We will keep doing it until I cannot do it. I hope after I cannot do it any longer. Matt?
Our last speaker, thank you, George. George has done amazing work all over the state and continues to do so. He's exploring the north now. Last speaker, Jay Heck, who's been on this issue for more than 2 decades. Jay Heck.
Started Sunday.
Amazing work for 2 days, Jay. He's been doing this for 2 decades at Common Cause in Wisconsin. Hi, Jay.
Thank you, Matt. I'm honored to have been asked to participate in this press conference. I guess as I begin my 23rd year at Common Cause, I've been asked to provide some historical context and perspective along with Senator Hansen, who's been at it almost as long. Just let me say, first of all, that the work of this coalition has never been more important. And the reason for that is that an honest assessment of the United States Supreme Court at this moment would tell us all that with the elevation of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, the chances of the U.S. Supreme Court overturning that narrow 5-4 2010 decision in Citizens United is not likely to happen anytime soon. Possible, but not likely. So what that means is that it's up to the people. It's up to citizens of our state to demand that their elected representatives in Congress accomplish the task of amending the Constitution of the United States, outlawing Citizens United, and once again reestablishing the prohibitions that we had for over 100 years in this state and in this country. Now, one thing that I think probably most of you have forgotten is that just 3 days before the Citizens United decision, which, as you know, was January 22nd, 2010, on January 19th, 2010, in this building, in the state Senate, this legislature passed the most sweeping campaign finance reform legislation that we have seen almost in our history, and certainly since that time. On that day, by an overwhelming bipartisan majority of 27-6, the Senate passed legislation that would have required not only the disclosure of all outside spending, but the regulation of all outside spending, corporations, unions, individuals, to be used in elections in Wisconsin. Regulation, by that I mean not the use of their corporate or union treasuries. It would have had to come through a political action committee, which is a far more difficult and far more arduous way of raising money for campaigns. 8 Republicans, a majority of Republicans in the state Senate, voted for that measure. 3 of them are still in the state Senate today. Senator Robert Coles of Green Bay, Senator Luther Olson of Ripon, and, believe it or not, Senator Alberta Darling of River Hills. The others are gone. The only Republican who's still in the state Senate, one of the 6 that voted against it, is, of course, the Senate Majority Leader, Scott Fitzgerald. So what is significant, of course, is that 3 days later, the Citizens United decision rendered that groundbreaking legislation in Wisconsin moot. What Citizens United said was that you cannot require corporations, unions, wealthy individuals to use disclosed and regulated money, and hence open the floodgates to the money we have in our politics today. But what Citizens United did not do, and which we could do tomorrow if there was the will in this legislature, I know the will is in the East Wing, but if there was the will in this legislature, we could require, at the very least, the disclosure of all this outside money that has flooded our elections for the last 8 years. We could also tomorrow, if there was the will, prohibit the coordination between outside spending groups like WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and Wisconsin Club for Growth with candidates like Scott Walker, as happened in the 2012 recall election. Wisconsin is the only state in the country other than Florida that allows that coordination. Those things we could do whether Citizens United is overturned or not. But what we need to do is overturn Citizens United. And I think, as George and Lisa have said, there's overwhelming support by all the citizens of this state and country, not just progressives, but conservatives who understand that there's too much money, too much secret money, not only ruining our politics, but undermining our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. So if anyone has any questions, anyone from the press has any questions for the senator or any of the other speakers, now's the time to ask.
Hey, Matt. Even if you limited campaign contributions and donations, won't these groups just start shifting their expenses to start influencing campaigns indirectly? For example, Tom Steyer spent $2.5 million here in the last election, but very little of that showed up in the campaign finance report. So,
well, I mean, that's why we need disclosure. That's what Jay was talking about. We need disclosure. We need limits on what individuals and groups can spend. We used to have a $10,000 aggregate limit here in Wisconsin as to how much any individual could spend on any race. So if they spent $10,000 for governor, they couldn't spend another dime to the parties or to other candidates. We need to reinstitute that ceiling on individual spending. Right now, the sky is the limit because of a disastrous rewrite of our campaign finance law in November 2015. And so now you've got billionaires giving $1 million to the Republican Party of Wisconsin and super rich philanthropists giving $1 million to the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, so you might think, well, it equals out. But our democracy isn't supposed to be a tug of war between a billionaire on the left and a billionaire on the right. In a democracy, we're all supposed to have an equal tug on that rope. So,
and what does the election of Tony Evers say about the influence of money in politics? I mean, he was well outspent in the election, still, overcame that.
He was outspent. Money gives your horse a chance. It doesn't absolutely mean that your horse is going to get out of the gate and run well. So, I don't think the horse with all the money, with most of the money, ran that great of a campaign, and people were sick and tired of looking at that same old horse's rear.
Is legislation similar to this been passed in other states?
Yeah, a lot of states are way ahead of us. In fact, on Election Day this November, some states passed good campaign finance reform laws. Other states passed fair redistricting laws. We are lagging here in Wisconsin. We used to be leading. We need to start leading again.
If I could just add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are not only other states that have done this. Illinois has better disclosure than Wisconsin. Illinois has better campaign finance laws. Now that's something to think about. Illinois. And it's not just Illinois. I mean, it's states across the country and obviously communities across the country that have risen up against this decision. This is arguably the most unpopular decision with the American people in American history. Even more unpopular than Dred Scott, because in 1857, half the country, the South, supported that decision, as awful as it was. People all over the country think this decision is garbage.
19 states.
19 states. I was proud to be with all the Democrats in the legislature in 2010 to do all the right things with democracy, and I was also sad to vote against, or happy to vote against all the crap they put in 2015. But this resolution simply says it places a question on the November 2020 ballot to ask the people if Congress should propose an amendment to overturn Citizens United versus FEC in related cases. Simply said, why would anybody on either side of the aisle be against asking the people what they think? We've already heard about what you've done, all the different communities in this state. Now it's time for them just to say, let the public say, this is the next big step. Overturn Citizens United and make democracy work again for our state, for our country. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
You bet. Appreciate it.